the topic of our call tonight was sort of why should builders get schooled, right? And maybe a larger question is, why would an architectural firm be interested in builder training? And if you guys would allow me a little bit of backstory, when we started working passive house space, Schack Architecture was back in 2015. So we've been working in this method for about 5 years. I went to a FIAS training down in San Francisco. I found passive house in doing research for a nonprofit grant that we had. It was a Boys and Girls Club of America in Eastern Montana, who had a reasonable budget, but we wanted to get the best wall assembly possible for their money. So for the first time in my architectural career, even though I've been practicing as an architect for nearly 15 years at that point, I started being serious about building science. And when I realized basically the gap in my own knowledge when it came to building science, I realized that that was something that I wanted to fill. So I went ahead and went to a training. I got certified, and I was very naive. I thought, okay, great, I have this CPH thing after my name. I have more letters after my name. Architects seem to really care about that. Everything's going to change now, and people are just going to beat down my door. And it didn't quite work out that way. We had a couple of projects full of people finding us by Google searching, oh my gosh, we have passive house designers in Montana, we want to talk to you. And they would come and meet with us, and we'd all get very excited about our passive house future together. And then we would spend time doing things, and eventually we would get around finding a contractor. And 2 times in a row, maybe actually 3 times, we got into a situation where the builder, when they signed on, said, yeah, totally, I'll build a passive house for you. They didn't actually know what they were saying yes to. So I'm not trying to throw my builder friends under the bus here. I'm just saying all of us didn't know what we didn't know. We just thought, okay, they should be able to read our drawing set to a level where they can estimate, they can schedule, and all this is going to be fine. And in reality, if you're a contractor and your business is actually about, you know, putting men and women in trucks every day and getting them out to a job and getting them home safely again, and doing the same thing every day in a way that can be profitable, if you have this annoying architect coming around, I want you to do things in a different way with different materials to a different standard, and we're going to control the project much more like a commercial building. Our builders, you know, that we're working with to their best ability, they were just sort of like, oh, this is, I am busy, I've got other projects to manage. And rather than them, you know, pushing all that work aside in order to put more energy into our project, they would end up, you know, throwing up the barriers of like, oh, I'm not so sure this is such a good idea. I'm not so sure we need to do all these things. And additionally around this, guys, is realized nobody had built a passive house in Montana yet. We built the first 2. So there was no other project that I could point at to say, believe me, we've done it over here, we've done it over here. So it was this sort of perfect storm of not enough experience on my part, not enough experience in our builder community part. And we decided that rather than having the challenge at the negotiating table between the architect, the client, and the contractor, and that getting kind of awkward and uncomfortable, we thought, well, what if our builders had the same education that the architects have? And if we all were on the same team together on the same side of the table, what could we achieve if we weren't having to, you know, teach them on the job and in a certain sense drag everybody up the mountain with us? What if they already, you know, knew how to climb? And so we talked to Mariana and Enrico at EMU Building Science, and we decided to host a build training in Bozeman. We did that in May of 2018, and we got 14 builders and 1 architect, Lotus, certified as certified tradespeople. And that was, I think, our first class, Mariana, where we had a 100% pass rate. We had great builders in that class. Josh was one of them. And the intent then was to when we had a project. So rather than trying to educate them at the moment they're trying to get a job, you know, they already know the drill. They know what they're getting into. And until you build one of these things, I would say the class is not enough, but I'll get to that in my Q&A with Josh. I think the class was instrumental in advancing the whole team to a point where this project is achievable. And both our Red Lodge project that we did with EMU and Tully Gallagher, who's not on the call tonight, but he also took a training class from EMU, I think were only possible because of the education that our builders had. So fast forward to now, We have another project coming up in Wyoming, and our client, and we require our builders that work on these high performance projects to have a certification. So we have the option of sending our client, or our builder rather, out to Denver, LA or New York to get trained. And our client was generous enough to suggest that we should organize a training in Jackson, Wyoming, and bring the training to our builder community. So we're currently working on recruiting builders for another training coming up in March. It's March 17th through 20th. And it's going to be held at the Jackson Center for the Arts, which is a lovely facility. I can speak more about that later, but ultimately I wanted to sort of set the stage for why as an architect firm would we spend time focused on builder training. It seems maybe a little unorthodox, but it has made a tremendous difference, not only in our ability to execute projects, but also in the willingness of our builder friends to jump on these projects and be effective. One thing I've said from the beginning and working in Passive House as an architect is that one of the things I love about it is that it really does force us to be collaborative. We cannot do these projects without a lot of integrated work between the owner, the architect, and the builder. And I think it's the way that it should be. We have to solve problems together. There has to be a lot of communication, a high level of communication for us to be successful. And I think that's what we all want. We all want to be building high quality products and delivering high quality service. And the Passive House method is really requiring us all to raise to that level. So for us, that's sort of why we feel compelled to do this. We don't make any money doing builder trainings. We're going to save that for Mariana and Rico. That's their biz. We're not teaching it. They are. We're just trying to encourage people who want to do it to think about continuing education in the construction space, and to be humble enough to understand that we can all learn more and do a little better. So I know that I've enjoyed my architectural practice a lot more with this foundation in building science. And I've been really excited to see how the builders become engaged when to see that their craft can be done at this higher level. And they're absolutely capable of doing so. And I think Mariana and Rico have developed a curriculum that does just that. So that is my preamble, I guess. Does anyone have any questions for me about anything I said, or if you think it's weird that architects want to support a builder training? Or I'm getting that we're a little bit of a different animal when it comes to compared to other architectural firms, but I do really hope that other firms are going to follow in the same path and have more of a focus on building science in the future.
Lindsay, can you talk about how you funded the training?
Sure. So in the Bozeman training, we were able to fill the class to a point where all of the basic costs of the class were covered. So each of the builders paid the tuition, which was right around $1,500. And Mariana, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that also included a test. It might have been a little less if you weren't going to sit the exam.
Yeah.
Okay. So $1,500.
Yeah. So yeah, that includes the 5 years listing with PHI for being accredited for the next 5 years in the database.
Yeah. Yep. And so, I think, and then that was we had a little bit of money in there where we were able to bring coffee and donuts. We hosted, on the Thursday night of that week, we had a beer and pizza night at our office. And the whole thing was, fairly casual and local, but comfortable. And we made really great friends. We met some builders that were new to us, but that were aligned with us in terms of what they wanted, the kind of work they wanted to do. And we were so grateful to them. So it really created a bridge for us to grow the community of builders that we were connected to. And that was another great side benefit of doing the training and helping it happen.
One thing I wanted to point out, Lindsay, is that we've had a couple of builders from Montana utilize a state grant that reimburses them for training. And I don't know the details on that, but that is something that I know your state offers.
Mm-hmm. And in our Jackson training, we do have a little bit of extra funding right now. If anyone knows of a government official, code official, county commissioner, city mayor, building inspector, public housing authority person, planning director, if there's somebody that's in the category of a decider, in the category of helping to implement policy planning for their community, we actually have some funding to support their tuition toward the builder training in Jackson. And again, this intent just coming toward that we all do better when we know more. And if we can get the folks that are in the position of proving building science behind this method, so that when we approach them with it, they're more familiar with it, that would be a really good thing. So we have a little bit of extra funding this time around in Jackson, where if that was an option for someone, or if they were struggling financially to make it to the training or pay for the training, they could contact us and we could see if we could help them out. Well, why don't we go ahead, if nobody's got questions for me, why don't we go ahead and dive into talking to Josh a little bit. Maybe I kind of want to start at the beginning with you, Josh, and I know that before going to this training, you already had a pretty good personal education in green building practices. I know you went to Green Build, I think in Chicago at some point, was that right? And so could you talk about expertise before you took the builder training? What was that like?
Am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I went to the Green Building Conference in San Francisco in 2006 with my brother, who was also in the trades. And ever since then, I've just been trying to apply what I learned. Even before that, I was interested in energy efficient design and building as much as possible. So, and I have a background in civil engineering, so the whole building science thing kind of makes sense in my brain, and I love it. And I just want to learn as much as I can whenever possible. So I had actually looked into taking the passive house training several years before you guys brought it to town. I think they had it out at the Weatherization Center where they were talking about it. It didn't work out, but so I was glad when you guys brought it to town again.
And what was, you were interested? I know you were interested, but sort of what were the factors that you had to consider before you signed up, I guess? What were the considerations you had that you were curious about before you actually pulled the trigger and decided to spend time in the classroom in May when you should out probably in a hole for a new project?
Right. Yeah, it was kind of a hard time to sit in a classroom for a week, but I think what pushed me over the edge was, I mean, I was borderline not going to take the class because I hadn't really seen the demand of people coming to me saying, hey, I want a passive house. I feel like it's always been the other way around where I'm like, hey, we can do this way and it would save you this amount of money every year or whatever. We could use these windows, have a better R value or U value. But you had told me that you had clients that were coming to you saying, hey, we want to build a passive house, and are there any builders doing it? So once I had heard that from you guys, I said, well, then it's worth it to me because that's what I really want to do. So that's when I decided, that's what pushed me over the edge, to hear from an architect firm that there is a demand for it. Because honestly, every architect I've worked with has not been, no, that's not true. There's been a few exceptions, but for the vast majority of architects that I've worked with, it's all about aesthetics and design and not energy efficiency is like the last concern. So I feel like I've always been in the position of trying to push that, whereas it was just refreshing to have it come from both sides. So, and the client in this case.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I remember having, after I got my certification, I, had lunch with a bunch of different contractors or coffee or whatever. So then Josh said to me, hey, I think you're talking about is great, Lindsay. This is awesome. But hey, I'm a contractor. I build what people pay me to build. And kind of many of them just kind of shrugged and said, I think it's great, but what initiative or what responsibility lies with them to sort of be prepared for this? And like, what are your thoughts about a statement like that? Do you buy that, or do you have any different opinion about that?
Of which where's response? Can you repeat it? What was the question?
Well, like, I guess I got a lot of like, oh, wait, what you're doing, Lindsay, but I'm a contractor and I just build what people pay me to build.
Yeah.
And there's sort of a missing piece there, I think, about the ability to sort of close the gap between conventional construction and passive house method, right?
Mhm.
And I think someone has to be curious to a certain point and understand that there's a difference. And I'm wondering, like, what got you over, over hurdle of just being like, I'm just take the projects that come along and I'm going to build, from the drawing sets the architects give me, and I'm just going to build what people want me to build. It's that whole sort of chicken and egg market question of who's driving the market.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think that's what I was speaking to before. Like, I felt like I was always the one saying, hey, we could do this better. Like, I even did a cost benefit analysis on a set of windows for this house that had all glass. And I'm like, and I got the client to go with the more efficient windows based on being able to downsize their heating system and just what they'd save every year just heating the place. And not to mention keeping it cooler in the summer. So, and that was in 2009. So I think for me personally, it's always just been a part of like what I want to do as a builder. And I know not every builder's out there thinking the same way. Now, having been in a passive house building or in the process of building one, it is to another level that I've not taken it to as far as like details on air sealing, insulation is increased, and yeah, I mean it's pretty specific, but it's a learning process, and I'm glad I'm a part of it. So.
Do you, early on in our passive house days, because we didn't have any built stock to point at, right? We had people were basically to be our study had to be our first build, and Tully Gallagher down in Red Lodge was our first build. We consulted with him, and he worked with EMU Building Science on that one too. And to the extent that we had builders that were very well intentioned, wanted to build green, or to the extent to which they understood green building was, or high performance building, want to do a project with us, but then once the actual specifications were in front of them, we had the experience where rather than diving into those specifications, we had builders basically try to, well, I can build a good house. Let me build the way I want to build it, right? Mm-hmm. Did you have any experience with that, Josh, where rather, where you had maybe a new technology or a new method, and did you ever find yourself wanting to sort of dive into that new method, or is it easier sometimes as a builder? I think this might be a relatable experience where maybe you want architects to get out of the way and let you build buildings the way that you know how.
Yeah, right. I'd say that, like I mentioned before, when I got done with that builder training or conference in 2006, it was kind of eye-opening as far as like HRVs were rather new then, on-demand hot water recirc pumps, just things that I was like, okay, I'm going to incorporate this into my houses for sure, because that's what we need. And I'm going to do a blower door test every time, find leaks before we do drywall. And so these are the kind of things that I started just putting into my projects that I hadn't before that conference, because I didn't know about it. Doing this building, I guess in other energy efficient buildings I've done, the Butaflex caulking or whatever that you use to seal up gaps isn't an approved method with passive house. So you have to tape everything because it needs to be a durable air barrier. So that is definitely different. Like, that takes considerable thought as you're going to make sure you can actually tape everything that you need to and get to it to tape it, because it's a lot easier to have the insulators be like, okay, we need to seal that up, and they just squirt some, we call it Black Death, and that's what they seal it up with. But, you know, for passive house, that's not a durable air barrier, so you need to be able to tape everything. So that's like one thing that I've learned, and probably in future projects we'll think ahead of time, like, okay, how are we going to tape it? Like, how are we going to durably air seal this envelope all the way around, like the pencil test, like draw a line all around the building. So I guess that's an example of a new technique that I'm going to try to implement into future projects from here on out, regardless of whether it's a passive house or not.
So then what was your experience of the class? Do you want to talk about that a little bit? I mean, getting into the class, like first maybe what were your expectations and what were your experience, and then how to kind of match up at the end of the week?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I went into it knowing that I had a pretty good understanding of a lot of pretty wide range of building science. And I was looking to add more to that, which I feel like I did through the class. There were a lot of intelligent builders in that class. I think we were probably pretty fortunate. And there were a lot of good questions that were being asked. And Enrico and Mariana did a great job of like putting out the information and answering questions that we were throwing at them every class. And yeah, I think it's just helpful to be in that atmosphere, kind of submerge yourself for a week every day and just absorb as much as you can. And also kind of refreshing, just knowing that there's other people that care about this kind of stuff in the trades. So yeah, I just, looking back on it, like I feel like I came out of it with an improved understanding of maybe things that I already knew or some new things that I picked up.
Was maybe one of the most, was there anything that really surprised you? That you learned that maybe once you had them in the class, maybe they seemed obvious in hindsight, but that were effective on your projects going forward?
Sorry, you kind of cut out.
Did I break up
Techniques?
there?
Yeah.
Well, like, yeah, is there anything in the class that was sort of any kind of aha moments or unexpected, you know, things that you learned or things that were especially valuable once you went back to your job sites?
Honestly, I think probably the biggest thing that I already spoke about was just the air barrier, like really making it so you can't lift the pencil off the paper the whole way around the building, and durable, not relying on caulking at all or any kind of sealants, but rather like a membrane or tape, basically, or OSB. So, and not even lumber really counts, and some engineered lumber doesn't even count. So that was kind of the most eye-opening thing for me. Yeah, that's probably it.
Well, and I understand that you guys had pretty robust conversations about windows as well. And you know, where we are in the Rocky Mountain West and cold climate, so much about achieving passive house comes down to the wind system. And new installation in passive house is a different sequencing and a different method. Have you found, I mean, you're installing windows right in our house, so we've been really anticipating the arrival of these windows. They came all the way through the Panama Canal and over here, they're imported. And Josh has now had one day to get them out of the container, and he's installing them right now. So what's different about this window installation from passive or from previous typical projects been in?
Yeah, I mean, around here, probably a large part of North America, or the US, we're pretty used to windows with nail fins. These definitely don't have those. But the glass is incredibly heavy. It's triple pane. So I learned very quickly that we remove the sash or the glass and we set the frame part of the window without the glass in it. And the frame is very stout, like it's wood and a lot of insulation. And for how strong and stout it is, it's not heavy at all because it's mostly wood and insulation. So it's not thermally conductive at all, which is beautiful. It's great. They're just really well made windows. And as far as setting them, they did not come with any kind of instructions or fasteners or clips at all. So we had to I kind of had to scramble. I talked with the folks we got them from and got an approved method to attach fasten all the windows. The operable ones were fastening with screws that we pre-drill through the frame and finish just so that they look nice and finished. They're stainless screws, and that's working well. And then the fixed windows I actually got some metal clips from the lumber yard and some short enough screws, and we're using those and bending them over and attaching them that way. So basically with clips. So it's working well. And then there's the tedious part of the taping. I had pre-ordered the right kind of tape that it's got multiple peel strips. And so you leave 2 of the backing strips on there and peel 1 and pre-apply the tape around the window before you put the frame in the rough opening. And then once you're shimmed and it's all installed and you've insulated, then you tape outside and inside. So it's much more involved process than we're used to. And we're stuffing. We're stuffing rock
a little
wool.
bit about, sorry, Josh, I think we're overlapping a little bit. Would you talk a little bit about the manufacturers that we're using for windows and doors? We're in climate zone 6B here in Montana, and we had a hard time finding Passive House certified products for this particular climate zone. So would you talk about who we ended up going with?
Yeah, and so we went with OptiWin. They're from Europe. I want to say Germany, but Lotus could speak to this. She dealt more with the selection of the windows, but I know it was definitely hard to find the right window that would meet the criteria for this climate zone because it's pretty demanding. But I just know that we're using OptiWin windows and SmartWin doors. SmartWin doors are made in Kansas, which is nice, but we still don't make glass good enough in the US. So they get their glass from Europe as well. And that's been part of we're still waiting on the doors. We don't have them yet. But part of that delay is the waiting on the glass because it's coming from Europe. So that's all I know. Maybe Lotus wants to chime in on that order.
I can.
Hey, Josh, can I ask you a quick question? Is there a reason you wouldn't use something like liquid flashing? Like if you're going to do Zip plus R and you didn't, because it seems like tape can be kind of tedious. Just curious.
Yep. No, that's a good question. The liquid flash, I did use some of that product, but the Tescon brand, which I got from 4 and 5, to do air sealing where we missed the membrane over the top of the wall before we started framing the second floor at a cantilevered section. So I had to get some liquid membrane to air seal to make the area continuous in a pretty tight spot that would be tough to do with tapes. But I have not used the liquid flash on the windowsills, the pan flash. I think that would be a good application for it. I don't know if the current temperatures we have here in Montana, if you could use it in these temperatures. I know their tapes are rated to down to 0 degrees to apply. So that's why, one reason why we're using the tapes. We are using the zip sheathing stretch. It's like, well, what do they call it? Pan flash, basically. You can stretch it in 3 ways for the pan of the window on the outside. But no, the or the taping I was referring to was more on the inside. The stuff we're pre-applying to the window frame before you put it in the opening needs to be an air permeable or vapor permeable, excuse me, tape. And that our air barrier plane is on the inside of our wall. So we need to tape the window frame to the inside of our wall to have a continuous air barrier in the envelope. So the liquid flash, you can't really span that gap. It's like a 1/2 inch gap all the way around the window for your shims and insulation.
Yeah,
and
that makes sense.
Yeah, the only way you can go over that is with tape. So
Yeah, Jeff, if I can address that too. One of the goals in our passive house design is that we want to be kind of using conventional materials in conventional ways. So kind of not asking builders around here to kind of like go out on a limb with products they're unfamiliar with labor, you know, having to train people in like really different ways. And liquid flashing just isn't something that's really that common on a residential scale. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is what kind of Josh was getting at is like, you know, a lot of design has to do with like the physics and the thermal dynamics and the moisture dynamics of the wall, and locating where your air barrier is in the wall is a really critical part of overall design. And so then making sure that all of your you know, all of your methods are compatible. So as you're moving from, you know, the ceiling barrier method to the window air barrier method to the wall barrier method, that you're not changing the permeability between those different materials. So that's a conversation that Josh and I have on a weekly basis. Oh, well, if we do this, like, is that going to actually change where our air barrier is or our vapor plane is? And so we're really careful to make sure that those are all staying kind of separated and in their respective places. And to jump over to the window question, yeah, it's definitely been the hardest part of our design, is finding windows that are at a price point that is you know, achievable and within you know, and then also while meeting all of our performance goals. So we worked with Emu on this project to do all of our thermal modeling and our you know, calculations around our window installation. And it wasn't until like pretty late in the game where we recognized that what we had thought would be a window that performs well actually didn't. So we kind of had to shift kind of in the 11th hour to a whole different system, which changes our air ceiling detailing and our window installation detailing. So that's definitely been quite a learning curve for us, for sure. And then the other piece of that is that I totally forgot what I was going to say. There's a lot of different, as you can see, there's a lot of different things you have to hold in your head simultaneously. Yeah, and I think it's also been an interesting, you know, as we put this all in practice, recognizing where, you know, kind of what are our tolerances for on-site changes. Because I think, and Josh, you can, you know, speak to this too, but I think there's a certain amount of like adaptability and, you know, sort of figuring it out on site that most builders assume. And within the passive house systems, you know, we are working with metrics that we have to meet, with thermal models that we kind of have to meet. And we don't have the same amount of like, oh, we can just substitute this, or we'll just shift over, or these kinds of things. Like we have a lot less changes that can be made in the field without necessarily having to circle back to, you know, some of our verifications and our performance constraints that have, you know, landed us the decisions where we are. So that's something we've addressed with the windows. Like, oh, well, if we move it in and out to make it easier to fasten, now that we know what they look like, we're kind of losing a little bit of insulation that we have a thermal model. And is that going to impact us, even though it could make constructability a little bit easier? So it'd be awesome if we like found a window that was affordable, that we could like figure out the detail for, and we could just like do it over and over again. But we haven't gotten it yet.
Well, and Lotus and I are in the same room, so the audio might be a little strange. As I have a question for Lotus. So before being trained as an architect and gaining her license, Lotus also was a general contractor, and we thought it would be really advantageous to have somebody in our office that also took the tradesperson course. So Lotus was in the same class with Josh. And I'm just curious if you want to speak a little bit, Lotus, about your experience as with a builder background, but with, I mean, I'm not, maybe you could talk a little bit about what your build science awareness was before architecture school, and then after this builder training, and then what it was like to be, we kind of called you our mole in like the group of contractors in the room, where, you know, snuck an architect in there, and what that was like for you, and then how that impacted our process in working closely with the contractor to achieve a certified passive house.
Yeah, so I was not that dialed into building science as an approach as a builder. I was a builder and contractor for 6 years prior to going to architecture school. And although I had a lot of experience in natural building, so a lot of the principles of building science are really what like natural building is based off of, just because of, you know, vernacular understandings and site-specific knowledge. So in terms of like thermal mass and orientation and you know, minimizing energy demands and those kinds of things. So those are all things that I was super familiar with. So when I went to architecture school, I specifically went to a program that had a building science emphasis, and worked in my architecture program with the building scientists, which were sadly like in their entire own wing of the building, and not as integrated as they promoted themselves to be, but however, you know, shockingly. I won't go off on my architecture pedagogy train at this point, but that's a whole other story. So I was lucky enough to get a really good foundation in building science in architecture school. And then, you know, I worked in the Bay Area for 2 years with a, you know, sustainable firm. They had been in the field, you know, for 30 years and really were pioneers to a lot of green design in the Bay Area. And when I moved back to Montana, it was like, I was really worried that I would be only able to find a job like building fancy houses for fancy people. It's not really what I'm interested in doing. So finding Love Schack and folks that were really interested in building science and really like wanting to apply that in a real way and be boots on the ground and be involved in construction and really take that really seriously and actually wanted to walk a collaboration walk was really awesome. So it's been quite a cool, I think, melding of a lot of my different interests and skills together. So the building class was, you know, a lot of it was like, oh yeah, the physics I had learned in school and these guys talking about the building stuff that I had, you know, hands-on with. But so the thing for me that was actually new to the class was the conversations around the expectations relationship between the designers and the builders and how that changes within Passive House. That there needs to be a much higher level of kind of detailing and clarification and, you know, specification and kind of what the contractor should expect from an architect is something that the builder training course really spoke to. It's kind of like, you know, okay guys, like you're here as builders, like if you're working with designers, like what should they know, and how do you know if they know what they're talking about? So hearing what that was from the builder perspective, and then being able to like carry that back into the architectural side and be like, no, this is something that these guys like we need to understand, and we can't just kind of leave it open, or like because of that lack of flexibility that I was speaking to, and just like, you know, we don't have a lot of like job site sort of figure it out room in the same way that you would in a kind of more conventional system. So I think that for me was the biggest piece of the class. And, you know, always, I think Josh can speak to this, we've, you know, continued to work really closely on this project is, you know, I'm very much thinking about all of our detailing from a constructability point of view. And I think that that's something that I really have a, an advantage about on because of my experience as a builder and really knowing hands-on like what it takes. Because sure, you can build anything, but if it's going to take 3 days to install a window, then that's like at not actual functional detail. So, you know, in trying to really translate this to be accessible, to have people be willing to, you know, take the risk and spend money and do things in this you know, you know, just in a different way, we want to make sure that the that the contractors don't hate you when you're designing something. So that's like my general approach to architecture. But you know, that maybe that doesn't make me always the most popular person in the office. So that's a really interesting balance to like, you know, stick with what are the performance metrics, what are the design goals, what are the aesthetic goals, what are the client, you know, the client desires, and balancing all that with constructability and affordability. You know, that's the puzzle that we're trying to solve every day.
Thanks, Lotus. I'm wondering if anyone else on the call has any questions specific to what a builder training is like, what, you know, one gained from that, maybe what was different before or after, or anything like that. I've been talking for a while, but I'd love it if anyone else had a question for us, for Josh, or any other discussion points along the way.
Hi, this is Gary. I'm just curious if you could describe the
Gary,
balance.
I think you're still muted.
Can you hear me?
There we go. I can hear you.
Okay. Just curious about the balance between classroom time and hands-on, putting tape on things and just doing hands-on kind of things.
Yeah, I could speak to that. I think it was most days that we tried it, and Lotus can, this was a while ago, my memory is not that great, but I think it was most every day at some point in the afternoon, you'd go into the workshop and work on a model, or I remember building a little enclosure with a little lamp in there, and you'd run the thermal thermometer, the IR thermometer over it, infrared thermometer, and see where it was working and where it wasn't. You got a chance to put your hands on the tapes, they had a bunch of different kinds of tapes there and membranes, and that was helpful just to see what was out there. Most of all that stuff is coming from Europe, and it does work better. So we've got some work to do over on this side. Not shocking to most of these people on this video, but on this call. But it was nice to just get out of your chair and put your hands on some of the products and get some specific hands-on detailing experience. So I don't know if Lotus has anything to add to that.
I can also give you guys an update on the passive pod workshop part of it if you're interested, because it's been it's changed a bit since we did the Montana class. So you guys did kind of a smaller version of the hands-on model, and since then we've developed a passive pod, kind of acts as a hands-on textbook to accompany the curriculum. I think it's important also to note that one of our missions is really to maintain brand neutrality. You'll see a lot of training in the States that's sponsored by manufacturers, and you get a range of, information with that. Some of it very good, but it can also be out of context sometimes. So we're very lucky in that, we've put out a call for product partners to donate materials so that builders can really try all of those things. And we've got a whole bunch of high performance products, some of them even American made now, that are being donated to the training to help the builders be able to understand the differences between everything. So what you guys did in Montana was kind of preliminary beta version of that. Now we've got kind of a more integrated, it's called the Passive Pod, and you can kind of integrated with the curriculum. And then we have teams where the builders test them at the end, so that you can kind of simulate how it would react in various scenarios. And we compare it with a pod that is built to the IECC code. So we have a code pod and then several different path pods.
Mariana, can you also kind of talk sort of the division between the time in the classroom versus like actually the building? My recollection, I'm Josh, it was a time ago, it was kind of like 4/5, 1/5, where we'd spend kind of the day in the classroom and then like the last couple hours building every day.
Yeah, that's changed a little bit as well too. We're a little bit more on the hands-on side now, but part of the new version of this curriculum is to really go back and forth one-on-one for each unit. So I don't know if you guys remember, but there are about 10 units in the curriculum.
I don't think we can hear you. Sorry.
Oh, hi.
You're right. That was my fault. You're good.
I could hear.
Good. Okay. Are we good? Tell me if you can't hear me again. But yeah, the way it's done now is that as you go through the units of the textbook curriculum of the classroom content, you'll hit thermal bridges, and then we'll break and go over to the pods and do the hands-on portion that's related to thermal bridging. You'll do a section on windows, high performance windows and doors, and then you'll go over and install a window on the pod. So for every kind of unit of learning that there was in the curriculum before, now there's a hands-on portion to kind of follow that mirrors the curriculum into the pod. I will say, since I've got all of you folks on the call right now, like one of the biggest hurdles in kind of getting this training out to more places in the U.S. is finding more qualified trainers. So if anybody on this call considers themselves, on the path to become a trainer of other builders, then definitely let me know, because we would like to try and get this to as many places as possible. So really appreciative to Love Schack for organizing it, and luckily you guys are close enough that we can just kind of truck the pods up to you guys. But the goal eventually is to have these pods available to our trainers around the country.
Yeah, Mariana, this is Josh. I would love if you could email me the list of materials that are made in the U.S. now, or products that we can use. I just like to know what they are, and maybe in the future,
yeah,
I'll train. I'd be interested in training some people.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, it'd be
That'd
fun.
be great.
Yeah, let's stay in touch on that.
Yeah, I will say just at a high level, I think we've seen the most active movement in the Windows area, which is a really good thing because we're so far behind on Windows in the United States. But there have been several companies popping up recently, and one of them is Advantage that you guys are using for the doors. But there's more attention on Windows in the States now than there has been in the past, so we see a lot more movement there. Membranes is still kind of rough. The best membrane companies are still, so you go for Klima, although Rotoblast and Partel, all of those European companies are starting up their American markets. Some of them are bringing manufacturing over to America because of that. And then, Windows and membranes are kind of the most specialized part of it. And then the rest of you guys saw in the training, insulation, because Passive House's performance criteria, you can use all kinds of different products to get to that level of performance. And as Lotus was saying, you know, the best way to do that is really not invent the wheel with flashy products, but try to use basic physics and you know, reach that performance level, not reinventing the wheel for all of these for all the builders that aren't used to those new products.
I'm kind of curious, Josh, if you could just talk a little bit about, you know, so after you take training, I don't remember how much time passed before we hired you to do our Bozeman Passive House, but it was several months. How did this builder training impact the projects you already had, or projects that you were about to start that maybe didn't have a Passive House goal? Was there anything that you took from the class that then benefited those projects?
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. Like, I guess what I said earlier is just really trying to do the best with the air barrier that I can to make it durable. You know, I guess I built my own shop and apartment out back behind my house. Built that after that passive training, and I tried to apply all the air sealing details that I learned in that class the best that I could. And that involved a lot of tape. Mostly where penetrations were going through the ceiling into the attic, wires, light boxes, plumbing vents, and actually that is one of the biggest challenges as far as the air barrier, is getting the Lotus and I just talked about this last week, getting the ceiling detailed so that you can still run lights and whatever vents in the ceiling, but not have to do some kind of insanely tedious air sealing all around it. And that is, maybe Mariana has details on how to do that. I've thought of different ways to do it. A drop ceiling maybe. I know people have sheeted the underside of the trusses with OSB and then taped all those joints and then did a drop ceiling with all the wires and everything below that air barrier. But that is something that I know I'm gonna keep going back to and like try to figure out a good detail on like how to air seal a ceiling. On my shop, the apartment above it, the lid of the apartment, I just used the drywall as the air barrier. And then taped everywhere I needed to. And I don't know if that's considered a durable air barrier or not, but to me, it seemed like the drywall, mud, and tape seemed pretty good. So I don't know if anyone has any way to speak to that. That is one challenging area that I would love some input on.
Wiring in cornices and baseboards so you don't have to penetrate.
What was that?
Wiring through cornices and baseboards.
Oh,
like
yeah.
if you're doing cove molding.
Yep.
I mean, that doesn't put a light in the middle of a place, but at least it runs it around the periphery.
Right. And the house we're building now, it turns out it needs to be sprinkled fire suppression system. So luckily I was able to get the designer to be able to put all the emitter heads in the walls upstairs. So I don't have to try to air seal to fire sprinkler heads that are designed to pop out of what they're sitting in when they need to go off, which to me would be pretty much impossible to air seal. But things like, you know, we're gonna use mostly pancake boxes for the downlighting upstairs, the lights that we're gonna seal, have to tape our membrane to every wire that's going through that membrane. And and at the top of the walls, where the wires come through the top of the walls. When we put the wall plates up, we membrane on top of the wall plates and tape everything we could time before the wood went to the bottom of the trusses. Anyways, it's a detail that maybe Mariana has can speak to.
Yeah, I'm gonna say this. I don't know what your team is. One of the that people come away from it with is just how much sequencing matters, and that's really why having an integrated design build team, being able to have your input with Lotus from the beginning of the project matters so much more, because those sequencing things can end up being items that get costly down the line, because if you get too far down the line, then the only thing you can do is throw tape at it, and so a lot of times the more time spent on kind of virtually prototyping it up at the front end with your designer, the more you can avoid those things. And that's one of those things that take probably the steepest learning curve in the post-class phase. Everybody gets through the class, and then you go off to do your first project. And I think what we've heard back is just the impact of that sequencing on quality assurance is what has been the hardest part to implement and the hardest part to learn. But once you've got that down, then it's just exponentially easier every single project that you do. And I think, that's kind of just the feedback we get from a whole bunch of different builders at the same time. They were talking about that today in training, actually. I don't know, do you agree, Josh?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like, sequencing is everything. Like, if you forget a step to seal, going back and sealing it after the fact is not easy. And I do anticipate that, this is the first passive house that I'm building, and I hope to be building more in the future. And I know that I'm learning a lot through this process that I will carry to the next project. Yeah, absolutely. I would agree.
Josh, if you had a builder friend who got an architect and a client team together and was going to do a passive house for them, would you advise that builder to go to this class, or would you think that it's wise for a builder to jump into a process of a certified passive house without first having some training? Where do you think it would have been like for you had you not taken the class?
No, I think it's definitely worthwhile to take the class. Just because then I think you don't know the full depth of what you're getting into, but you have a much better understanding of what it takes to make a passive structure, passive house. And I think just learning everything that Enrico and Mariana taught us in that class and is in their book, I think is invaluable when you're going to actually do it, because you have the building science knowledge behind it to understand why you're doing the things you're doing. And sometimes Lotus alluded to this earlier, that things aren't always going to work like they do on paper in the field. So that's part of my daily job, is troubleshooting and problem solving. And if I didn't have a good, sound building science understanding of why things are done the way they're done and what the overall intent is, then solving these problems wouldn't work. So I think it's imperative that someone take the training if they're going to try to build a passive house, in my mind.
Can I interject real quick?
Yeah.
Regarding the wiring and such, did you consider a service chase?
A service chase, is that what we said?
Yes.
Yeah. And we do have one vertical service that was mostly located above where the radon pipe was coming up from the crawl space. And I heard of that technique more centralized in the building to run more than just pipes, but like you're alluding to, like electrical, plumbing, and all that stuff. And that is one, that's, I guess, not something we incorporated at the design phase, but I do think that might be a viable option in the future.
That would be inboard of your air barrier.
Right.
And
right. And that would help you with vertically getting things, but I'm not sure still about sealing the entire ceiling of the building and getting lights everywhere you want and wires. And to me, it seems like some kind of drop ceiling may make sense in a passive house for that reason.
Well, we have a client in Fort Collins that use service chase in his ceiling as well, and for that exact reason, you know, with LED lights, for example, things have gotten a lot easier with service chases.
Yeah, we see that a lot.
Yeah, and this is actually a project that EMU did provide a fair amount of consulting on. It's Greg Fish project, Mariana.
And what is the detail of that service chase? What's the specific?
I think it might be a better thing to perhaps take it offline, and Rico actually could give you a lot more details on what was, you know, actually designed or provided in the design.
Yeah, I'll say. Yeah, at a high level, I mean, it really depends on each project, but it was something that was integrated very, very early on, and so it's harder to go back. You know, like I said, sequencing matters so much.
Yeah.
It's a hard thing to add in after the fact, but that was kind of one of the first design decisions. So, but it's different in every project. But we have worked on a lot of projects where that has been one of the better solutions, just for the reasons that you were saying.
Yeah, I mean, we have the service cavity on the walls everywhere, which is great. We don't have it in the ceiling, but that is something that, you know, that's an example of just sequencing and getting in there
in the future.
Yeah, for sure. Like that, like I said, learning and applying it to the next job, the next one. So
Lindsay, you had made a comment in regards to builders taking the training, and I've actually referred a couple of homeowners to the training at with the EMU, and one of them's going to GC his own project. He's got some building background, but he's going to be taking this upcoming training. Is he in the current training, Mariana?
Sorry, I lost everybody for a second. I think I hit bad patch. Can you repeat that?
I believe that the Floyd residence, David Floyd, is taking the training right now. Is that correct?
Yep. Yeah, he's in our class this week.
Yeah. So he's a homeowner. He is going to GC his own place. But there have been others that I've recommended to take the training, largely because they're going to be highly involved in the actual build, which, you know, is a little bit unique in some cases, obviously. But you know, I think it's something that you might even consider saying, "Hey, Mr. Homeowner, why don't you take the training? Because it's worth it. It's good option." And it gives them an idea.
Yeah, I was gonna say we've had a few, you know, overly involved homeowners that have taken it, and it's never a bad idea. And I was gonna say, you know, aside from the builder training, I think one of the reasons that, you know, Josh is having such a good opportunity with the Love Schack ladies is that they did a consultant training. And I mean, it's about building that whole ecosystem of professionals who've had the relevant training for their roles, and then defining those roles in a better way, having your team more defined, and having that sequencing defined up front. You know, so, you know, NAPHN has been offering consultant and designer courses all over the place. Hopefully they'll bring some more out here again. I think there might be one in Denver in the fall. But you know, if there's builders on the call right now, I would say finding architects that have also done the design training is also key, because that's having that same conversation.
But having
I
the
can.
homeowners involved in the training, I think, makes the buy-in even greater. And that's, as Josh had suggested earlier, is a really important component of the overall project.
Well, and I was just going to share too that when we did the designer training, there was only a couple of us in class of 12 that were architects. And I remember when I submitted my design exam, I was completely flummoxed how anybody without actual design goals in terms of document structure the test. So we had people from many different functions in that course. I've lost touch with most of them, though we're still connected. I think the people that are still working in the space do have a background in architecture. So designer training does really seem best and most specific for people who are going to use that professionally as designers. However, I think the tradesperson training is really effective in terms of understanding the foundational building science, and gets a little bit farther according to materials and applications. And because Passive House is this actually pretty flexible system where there's a lot of different assemblies and ways there's not necessarily one assembly they're going to train you how to do. Just like when I went for my designer training, I sort of naively thought they were going to teach me exactly how to build a passive house in my climate zone. But there's many ways to do it. And so they basically want to arm you with all the tools, and then it's up to you to figure out the system. But for a tradesperson training, I think it's awesome for a homeowner, a code official, anyone who's basically trying to understand high performance building science. This would be perfect kind of encapsulated knowledge for that person too, and not just our tradespersons, but we've had people from window companies take the class. We've had full-on GCs. We've had people that are more of a subcontractor level. We've had a couple of folks that were more on the sort of contractor estimation side because they just wanted to be able to speak the language of Passive House so they could be effective in their company for high performance building. So I think that the tradesperson training just has a much wider range of applicability, and for that reason we really support it. Well, guys, do we have any other questions for Josh, for Lotus, or for me? It is almost 7:30 here in Montana, and I really appreciate everyone's time tonight on this topic. Like I said, it's a unique thing we do here at Schack Architecture, trying to spread the word about the education. But I want to make sure people have a chance to get their questions answered if they have them.
Do you mind if I throw in a couple?
Please.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm the homeowner that's going to GC his own project, because I'm not optimistic about finding somebody where I bought land and intend on building a retirement house. And part of my motivation is to keep my expenses down, in addition to all the other good reasons. Instead of trying to make my house here in Aurora efficient, which is a lost cause, I'd rather just do it right from the beginning and reap the rewards. Low overhead, right? Not everybody can retire in a big pile of cash, so you've got to do whatever you can. One thing I was kind of curious, I started into this direction looking at SIP houses, where you're literally, in so many ways getting a kit in effect, but I realized the manufacturing of SIP is kind of hit or miss. You could have a really good manufacturer and maybe not so much. And it kind of seems like maybe a better approach, kind of where I've evolved my thought, is to use something that's more like a conventional stud framing. Get back to that, doing what you know. Has anybody used T-studs, for example? I mean, it seems like either you have to frame an entire house twice, or if you can use 2x8s with that, without the thermal coefficient, that might be your way to go.
And it kind of depends if you're trying to meet passive in what climate zone, because T-studs are a good way to meet code more efficiently and cheaper. But when you get out to the thicknesses that you're looking at for passive in much of the Rocky Mountains, you kind of supersede the need for that. But
So you might be okay in Pueblo, but not in Vail or Aspen or something.
You're in Aurora, correct?
Yeah, you're in Aurora. I mean, we're in time zone 5 here. I wouldn't even, I'm not sure if even it'd be applicable if you're trying to reach passive house level in climate zone 5. I mean, in warmer climates, it would work.
Okay.
But I don't know, that's a very generic, not to rip on TSAs that are extremely, useful for what they're useful for. But once you're starting to do passive house level thicknesses on walls, there are other ways to solve it as well that can also work a little more in your favor sometimes. Depends on what kind of assembly you want to do.
Yep. And I'd be eventually shopping for an architect to help me with this, but my intent is I bought a couple acres in Pueblo just because the price is right. So my goal is to cash out of Aurora and build something there.
Also climate zone 5, I believe.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, maybe Edie, do you have anything that you would add to that conversation about prefabricated wall systems? I mean, I think that among menu options for wall systems are the double stud. Some people are still using maybe a Larson truss. SIPS panels are definitely an option, and then within SIPS panels is a range of the actual materials.
Yeah. Thanks, Lindsay. Our wall system, and sort of a horrible name for it since it's a building envelope, it's wall, roof, and floor system, is a wall assembly. It's manufactured in a workshop and then brought to site. So imagine Legos for passive house. And our walls are 8 foot in length and our interior height is 10 foot. So a very comfortable space. And we're trying to create a solution. You guys have all talked to how difficult the training is, that it really is. It's a totally new way of thinking about assembly, and we're trying to speed that up and bring more builders and certainly more homeowners into passive house and making it a little bit easier to adopt. So Jeff, we're in Santa Fe. These walls are being used in Ski Valley, so certainly to the performance that you need in Colorado. We're actually going to offer them at 3 different climate zones, R values. It's not perfect for every project, but it is a standardized wall, so you can design basically 2 8-foot lengths, and we can work it out and figure out your order for the manufacturing. This is an interesting conversation because of who's on the call. We have standardized home plans that can be licensed through us as well and customized, and then of course using our wall system, or any designer architect can be brought on board to design with our system and just specify it. So we're absolutely on mission of passive house being the way forward. We want adoption everywhere. We're sort of like going to stand up on a rock and start screaming about that. But in terms of SIPs and other products, our product also is considering the carbon footprint of the materials, the raw materials. So we are prioritizing things that are carbon sequestering, that really give back. We're shooting to not just hit, the operational carbon footprint, but the embodied carbon. Passive house takes care of that 28% of our footprint. What we're also trying to attack is that extra 11 in what materials we use and where we get them and how they're manufactured. So it's a great example. So Jeff, this is something we could send you sort of our standard.
Sure.
It is just the envelope, so you can clad it appropriately to your region or to your aesthetic, right? So it's the box. You treat it, and then Josh, the same thing. It allows for that exterior chase, both in the ceiling and the walls for running what you need to run. And I'm sorry, because fire suppression is always just a killer on any project, and we get that a lot here in the county in New Mexico. So I'm sorry about that.
What's the name of your company?
I sent it to you in the chat, but it's
you did. Okay.
Prefab.com. Yeah.
Sorry.
So we're happy to talk to anybody, and we definitely want EMU to come here and do training. We do not have tradespeople who have been trained. I recently did a search in New Mexico specifically, and I think I found none. Maybe one.
No, we had a couple. We had a couple of New Mexico guys.
Yeah.
Like last year, we think we had 2.
Yeah.
But I don't know if there's.
We need more. We need you to come down, or we're going to start shipping people up. But what Lindsay's doing, Love Schack's doing is incredible, because it's a whole new way of thinking and working. And Jeff, I'll take it back to you and to the conversation earlier. If homeowners or landowners are not demanding this of the market, it's very hard to move the market in this direction.
No doubt.
Really
By the way,
hard.
I'm an audio video contractor, so I work with architects and GCs, and I get to see a lot of what momentum is, and I see this as a radical paradigm shift, and yet it just makes so much sense, in the long run.
Yeah, it's coming, and there are a lot of people working very hard on the ground, but it's coming. I mean, Denver City Council did a good thing recently.
Woo-hoo!
Yeah, it's moving. And from our side, I mean, we're talking to a lot of people who have been in the trenches for a long time, and people are very, very excited that there is a solution, that people are working on this, that there is movement afoot. And you guys are all doing amazing work. It's not easy, right? Just the materials alone, it's not easy. So we're trying really hard to speed things up.
By the way, I've got to give props to Matt Rising, the Build Show, for providing a lot of good YouTube videos.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody's been watching him, and I'm glad he's kind of throwing it out there to people like us so we can be aware of what's going on. Otherwise, I wouldn't have a clue for the most part.
The video content helps a lot. It helps a lot.
Yeah, I would just add, Jeff, that in my experience as an architect in the passive house scene, I've been completely floored by the open source information that people have been willing to give me. And in articles that are more typical, I find people are less likely to share and collaborate. There's more territoriality around details, methods, resources. And in the passive house community, everybody is just sort of like, let me help you. I've had the same problem. I've been through this. Let me email you a spreadsheet where I solved that problem, and let's just, good luck to you. Like, there's no, it's the first community I've found where people are more interested in the good outcome of passive house, and that exceeds any personal need to sort of, hoard it all for yourself. Like, people really do want to work together to make everybody's buildings better. And it's a very altruistic position, I think, from the design community, given where we've been.